Welcome, YBA Joes, to Run That Back, the show where we take two runs of a similar time and we see what made the difference in the end. You see the tale of the tortoise and the hare repeated a lot in different forms of competitive media, and video games are no exception, though today's episode is likely one of my favourite examples. If you go to the speedrun.com page for YBA, the times that are generally expected as an average player for storyline speedruns are around 16 minutes. However, if you're doing this for an account that is already prestiged, that goes down dramatically. The big difference between these two categories is that for fresh accounts, you need to start the storyline with a completely new account that hasn't received anything outside of it. A good way of telling if an account is fresh is seeing if they spawn at the car park, as this only happens if an account is completely fresh. On the contrary, post-prestige storyline speedruns can be started whenever. You're allowed to prepare as much as possible. So, as an example, you're allowed to go in with a level 50 MIH Hamon to melt through all the bosses and get you through the different moving parts way quicker. And this is exactly what the current world record does. However, there are two other runs that take these approaches. And comparing one of them with the current world record for fresh accounts, well, what the hell happened here? That's what I care to explain in this video, to break down both the greatest fresh account run that has currently ever been performed, as well as a post-prestige run with a comical amount of errors. And hopefully, from both ends, you can learn something new in the process.
Into the heat of battle. Go for it!
Because of the differences between the category, Shelf only has to talk to Jonah to start the timer, whereas for Ham, it's when he first moves. So by that virtue, by the beginning, Shelf has a little bit of an advantage if we're comparing these runs at face value. Both runners have a similar way of killing the guards. It's just that because Shelf is using Made in Heaven, he's able to run them together quicker and therefore kill them faster. However, with Ham, because at this point he only has his bare fists, he inevitably spends a little bit longer on them, and it also doesn't help that this guard split wasn't exactly the best, considering that the last guard did block a few more times than necessary. The thing that makes Made in Heaven so good for post-prestige is, on top of the fact that it's already pretty good for killing the NPCs if you know what you're doing, its double acceleration and at times time acceleration are able to get you to different places way faster than every other stand, with the exception of maybe the hand if we're considering erasure flicks. However, to make use of that increased speed, you've got to know where in particular you can go whenever the cameras are moving, because you still have full control of your character. Shelf isn't fully accustomed to this, and so directly pile drives himself into a wall when trying to move towards the second John. Ham has to take the approach very differently, considering in the fresh account run, you have to get enough items to sell for $5,000. And it's most optimal to pick up Rokers, as Rokers sell for about 600, they're very common, and if you can find at least 8 of them, then you only have to talk to the merchant once, which saves a ton of time. So Ham goes for a slightly slower leftward approach, so that he can go over more item spawns. I wasn't able to say it as it was happening, but Shelf accidentally unsummons his pluck while using Luck and Pluck, and that makes it so that the move completely disables, much to his dismay. Here is the first egregious mistake in Shelf's run, where instead of heading to the boss Bucciarati, he talks to the first NPC Bucciarati, the one which you normally talk to after killing the boss. And he uses a double acceleration to get to it, which wastes him even more time than if he just did it without popping double acceleration, and also means that he can't use double accel for the Bucciarati fight, which is overall a massive time loss from something that shouldn't have even been considered. At this moment, Ham makes a risky decision in the run. Instead of going for Agility 5, which is normally always the correct thing to go for so you're consistently gaining time, he instead uses the skill points to unlock Starthinker. This is mainly because Bucciarati's AI can sometimes be very unpredictable, and for the cost of a couple seconds, Ham wanted to make sure he had a fast Bucciarati. Ham enters the train station just as Shelf exits, and this is the part where Shelf saves the most time, as, like I mentioned earlier, thanks to double excel and in a couple of areas time acceleration, getting from NPC to NPC is extremely easy with Maiden Heaven. Because Ham went out of his way to unlock both Starfinger and Inhale going into Bucciarati, he's able to make way quicker work of him than if he just got agility, which is where the trade-off for having less speed pays out for him. Ham once again goes very slightly out of his way to pick up a Roka, because if he can find 8 of them, he only has to talk to the merchant once. This will come back to influence another decision later to make sure he can get the 8 Rokas, but just keep that in mind for now. While Maiden Heaven is really fast for talking to NPCs, Star Platinum is also no slouch thanks to him being able to get time skip just as the part where you have to talk to the most NPCs is coming in. So it's not like Star Platinum is going to be lagging behind too much in that regard. Shelf takes a page out of Ham's book and talks to Misa through the wall. This helps him with movement as the camera's going down, as well as making it so that moving out of the pizzeria is far less finicky, which is something that he tends to struggle with. Shelf actually takes a poor route when heading to the arcade here. You'll be able to see it later in Ham's run, but you're actually able to walk down a pretty short strip to completely skip walking around the building and through the fence. Here, Ham notices that he missed a Roka, but he's way too far ahead of it for it to be worth it to pick up. However, he does find 1 or 2 more on his path, which brings his total closer and closer to 8. Initially, when heading up to the pizzeria, Ham is just barely not standing close enough to Mista, and that wastes about a second with some unintentional movement. Here, Shelf is unable to replicate a trick where if you stand close enough to the arcade doors, then you can walk out of the arcade while the camera is moving. Ham would also mess this up later in a different method, but Shelf is a bit different because he didn't dash beforehand, so there was almost no way he was gonna get the trick on his own. Ham tries to replicate a trick he saw in a different run, more specifically, PikaJSG's Fresh Account Storyline speedrun, where if you time skip instead of dashing out of the door, you're able to go further as the camera's moving. However, Ham activates this either too early or too late, and is unable to get himself out of the arcade, instead getting him stuck on the door frame, wasting a couple seconds. Here there's another split in both of the categories, as in Post Prestige, you already have the $5,000 at the beginning, so you can head straight to Trish. However, in Fresh Account runs, you have to find the items to sell, and Ham is only 1 Roka away from being able to one-cycle it, and the closest Roka he can find is at the fountain. So Ham takes a very slight detour to pick up a Roka that's very slightly out of his path. It does take a little bit out of his time, but it doesn't take longer than a 2-cycle would have taken, so it's a net positive. Upcoming is one of the most impressive parts of Ham's run, where he is able to perform a, for lack of other words, perfect merchant split. He resets and gets the merchant respawn first try, and is able to use a recently discovered trick where you can talk to the merchant through the wall, saving you a few seconds if you do respawn at the merchant's keep. And then after selling his Rokas, which he was able to get a 1-cycle for, he gets the perfect respawn for Trish, getting him a perfect merchant split, something which has been desired for even the fastest of runs. At the same time, Shelf is still struggling through the Fugo split after having a lot of his moves cancelled by the M1s of Purple Haze, and eventually a Barrage which he wasn't able to prevent near the end. Shelf starts talking to Trish the second Ham is almost done, and this is where Ham's biggest time saves come in, and that's with killing the bosses. Star Platinum, specifically in this category, is the fastest stand for killing the bosses, with Magician's Red coming in at a close second. This is because most of Star Platinum's moves have really low cooldowns, don't cost much in the skill tree, and do quite a lot of damage, as well as coming out really fast and almost never ragdolling the opponent, with the exception of Aura Kicks, which acts as a better heavy punch for starting the bosses. And Ham is able to take these advantages and absolutely roll with them. Meanwhile, after Shelf fast travels to the completely wrong place, he starts with Pesci. And his Pesci fight, oh my god, just from watching his Pesci fight, it is extremely clear that he does not know how to fight Pesci. The trick to fighting Pesci is using almost all your moves that don't knock down, and then the second he starts getting hits on you, you activate a full barrage to do extra guaranteed damage to him and let your cooldowns run through. However, the way Shelf is approaching it is that he's just going balls to the walls, which, without a strategy, eventually leads you to getting comboed over and over and over by Pesci, and eventually leads to his death. I actually have a video linked in the description where it's this segment, but for every single avoidable mistake he makes, it plays the meme. After Shelf meets his Mako with the funny fishing rod boy, Ham starts his Pesci segment. And just from watching it, you can tell that even with a stand that isn't fully maxed out yet, having a plan when heading into Pesci is all it takes to turn a good run into a great one. Ham has already killed Pesci by the time Shelf comes back to refight him, completely flipping the script on what was before Shelf is one action ahead of Ham, turning it into now Ham is one action ahead of Shelf. It was also worth mentioning that in the skill tree before going to Pesci, Ham was just barely able to both increase his vitality and get Aura Kicks, which helped out a lot near the end of the run, even if the extra vitality upgrades weren't exactly necessary. Something rather extraordinary then happens on Ham's screen, because if you didn't know, in YBA, if two cancelable moves both hit each other on the same frame, they then both hit each other. This is most famously shown in Eclipse's Outburst on Whitesnake Bingo, which if you haven't seen, I recommend you see it, it's absolutely hilarious. Ham makes quick work of Yacha while Shelf is struggling for a little bit to figure out where to go. And from here, Ham only has one more task, defeating Diavolo. Here, Shelf accidentally messes up his splits, which takes him a second to fix up, while he's completely oblivious to the fact that you don't need splits to confirm a time, and instead you can just brain count the whole thing. So, if you break your splits, you might as well just end them instead of wasting time trying to fix them. Here, Ham makes another mistake, specifically in the skill trees, where even though he's able to max out Star Platinum's destructive power, he wants to get just a little bit more rage capacity. But unfortunately, thanks to the YBA auto skill tree bug, he isn't able to max it out all the way with the text box in the way, so he has to settle for only one rage upgrade without losing time. Ham is very familiar with the AI of Diavolo, so he's able to skillfully bob and weave and attack at the correct times, opening, closes, and stuff like that. Even moments where the AI wasn't even intended to have the gaps where it did. Shelf is extremely confused for about 15 seconds as he has no idea where to go. This is somewhat softened by the fact that he did get a lucky spawn, but the time where he would have saved from that lucky spawn was negated as he walked directly towards the fast travel point, thinking he was at the wrong spot. Here, Hamman finally finishes Diavolo, albeit pretty far away from Giorno, which does lose him a little bit of time, and he talks to Giorno to net himself a 1323. which would end up becoming an absolutely legendary run in the community. As for the longest time, when White Album was believed to be the meta, anything below 14 minutes was already god tier. So getting a 13-2x was almost inconceivable. But alas, with almost no massive mistakes and only a handful of negligible ones, Hamon pulled through with a 13-23. The best way to fight NPCs with Maiden Heaven is to use M1s, quickly pop a barrage, use knives to reset the M1 strings, and then use infinite speed when all of those are on cooldown. But instead, Shelf consistently relies on Lock and Pluck in the middle of the matches rather than starting with it, as well as using Heaven's Judgment and Speed Slice in the neutral, where even though they do quite a lot of damage, the iframes that the AI get from standing up, as well as the time that they spent ragdolled in the first place, wastes quite a bit of time that you could be getting dealing damage to them. At the end of the day, Shelf ended up finishing the run with a 14-33. Not that bad of a time by any regards, but considering that he had the same moveset as what could get a 10-39, it does leave quite a bit to be desired, and really gives an idea onto how much the different categories can be optimized.